Hi there folks, this is JK, the Norwegian mystic. I just got done reading Civilization and Its Discontents by Sigmund Freud, and here is my key takeaways. Let's summarize it for you. What is civilization? Well, civilization is a byproduct of the realization that mankind can do more collectively than he can individually. Freud says that this is brought about through an underlying principle of the eros, the love principle, which causes unification from division. It's a process of unifying the divided. He says the purpose of civilization is to regulate interpersonal relations, how man relates to man. He says it is a function of civilization to deny us full satisfaction and urges us on to other paths. He says that civilization is built upon a renunciation of instincts. Let me pull a quote here from page 105. He says, "It almost seems as if creation of a great human community would be most successful if no attention had been paid to the happiness of the individual." So what is he saying there exactly? Well, he's saying that, for the sake of example, an ant colony is so efficient in being that every ant does not do whatever it wants. Or if it had an idea of it being happier doing something else, it can't just say, screw this worker position, I want to go do something else. And then on page 49, the liberty of the individual is no gift of civilization. And another quote here from page 38, he says, "What we call our civilization is largely responsible for our misery." So through these quotes, he's showing how the individual's wants and needs are in opposition to civilization's wants and needs. So according to Freud, the underlying drive for each individual is the pleasure principle. And he says this runs counter to the unifying principle of civilization, and from there discontents arise. So in going into Freud's pleasure principle from the individual, just take for example anything that you are striving for, and then ask yourself, would I be striving for that thing if I thought that once I attained said goal that I would be miserable because of it? So there's always this underlying assumption that whatever we're going after, that once we get it, we're going to be happy. It's going to bring us pleasure. He says that the greatest hindrance to civilization is man's natural inclination to be aggressive towards one another. Civilization requires of us that our sexual and aggressive instincts be tamed. This also is a source of man's discontents. He says that man is a wolf to man, and he points out this scenario that ensues. It hopes to prevent the crudest excess of brutal violence by itself assuming the right to use violence against criminals. So at the same time, civilization tells the individuals that they cannot act out against violence. The punishment for said crime is itself a violent act on the individual. He talks about how man uses civilization through technological advancements in trying to diminish these sufferings, only to find that they bring about the same problems in different forms. 40. He says, "If there had been no railway to conquer distances, my child would never have left his native town, and I should need no telephone to hear his voice." So it's like his child has this desire to leave town. The technological advancement is the train, but because of the train, now there's this great distance, and a new technological advancement via the telephone needs to be made in order to alleviate the suffering. He says that in being educated to believe that ethical perfection is not only expected of us, but it is of the norm, that sets man up to be discontented. He says that man is set up to fail by given commandments such as love thy neighbor as thyself, and then goes into illustrations as to how this is an unattainable goal. He speaks of man having this sort of general malaise towards civilization, but what he really emphasizes, the main discontent being, is the problem of guilt. So he really wants to go into guilt here, and think about what a strange thing it is, because it sort of makes sense on one level that if I was to act out violently, that I would feel some sort of guilt or remorse from that. But even in the idea of when the thought occurs of acting violently, then I can experience guilt and remorse even from an action that hasn't even taken place. It's only been conceptualized by myself. And it's like that phenomena of guilt, that feeling, is a peculiar thing, and he starts to go into it. Now, this video is not about explaining the 3 states of consciousness by Freud, but Freud has the id, the ego, and the superego. And in here, he's explaining how the superego is reinforced by the civilization, and the superego is what brings on that state of guilt and remorse upon the ego. The superego's function consists in keeping a watch over the actions and intentions of the ego and judging them, in exercising a censorship. So the superego is influenced by the civilization. And he says things like bad conscience is really just social anxiety, which I thought was kind of funny. So if I have a thought about being violent towards somebody, and then I have a sense of guilt towards that thought, even though no action's been taken out, he says that that sense of guilt is imposed upon the ego from the superego. He says there are 2 reproaches against the superego. The first being it takes insufficient account of the strength of the id. So those most primal, most visceral urges that have been with mankind and lay dormant in your reptilian brain, or not so dormant, in your reptilian brain, the superego does not take account for just how strong those are. And the second being that it imposes upon the ego in relationship to its id obey commands which are impossible to obey. So in all of these scenarios so far, the superego is being influenced by the civilization. But he says a great change occurs, or can occur, when the authority is changed from the external to the internal. So he's still talking about the superego is the one more or less telling the ego how to behave, but the superego is not being directed, so to speak, by the civilization. So he says that when and if this great change occurs in an individual, the level to which the superego imposes guilt on the ego will not necessarily be in relation to that of the former. So for example, if anyone was brought up with a really lenient childhood in which they would be able to do basically whatever they wanted, once this superego takes place, it can very well and very likely take the place of a much stricter authoritarian figure. So he points out an interesting thing so far as man's discontents. He says we are unable to compare what level of our unhappiness with civilization is to those of previous ages, because it's only just as of then started being, recorded. So we can't go back in time, let's say to the civilization of ancient Egypt and have any data, so to speak, on just how the individual felt of their place in society, their relationship to society, and their frustrations that arose from that. At the very last page, Freud says, "Thus, I have not the courage to rise up before my fellow man as a prophet and bow to their reproach that I can offer them no consolation." So, in conclusion, he does not sum up with a big, here's my solution to the problem. This is basically his examination of the scenario at large. So, really, in short, discontents arise in the individual because he has a disintegration happening within him. The one being that of the id, which Freud is the pleasure principle, this sort of unbridled pleasure seeking, and then that of the superego, which Freud says is either influenced by civilization at large, or that great change can take place, which it then becomes an internal source of authority. And these two are continually in opposition from each other. Discontent arises. Oh, Freudy, it's been nice. It's been real. It's been good. Thank you once again for checking it out, you guys. My name is JK. I'm the Norwegian Mystic. There's going to be plenty more content like this coming your way. Like, subscribe. Thank you. Until next time.
Was an open book. Well, I never thought that you'd take a look. You can move on. There's nothing to see here. Soon I'll be gone, but not soon enough.